This Thursday, the Commons will decide on UK government plans to restrict the voting rights of Scottish MPs. The move to introduce a new parliamentary stage to allow only English MPs to shape purely English legislation has proved highly controversial. The cross-party Commons Procedure Committee today branded the proposals over-engineered and potentially burdensome. Well, earlier we spoke with the Tory MP for Milton Keynes South, Ian Stewart, who's a parliamentary aide to the Scottish Secretary. Ian Stewart, are you confident the government will win the vote on Thursday?
Yes, I believe so. I think over the summer the government has listened to some of the concerns that were expressed when we had the debate in the early part of the summer, and I'm very confident that the principle remains, but the actual process will be accepted by the House.
What about what the committee said, over-engineered and potentially burdensome?
I don't think it is. I mean, don't forget, this was a very clear promise in our manifesto to rebalance the devolution settlement to make it work for all parts of the United Kingdom. And I think it adds in an additional stage to legislation. It's not about taking away any member's right to debate or vote on any bill, but where the bill applies solely to England, then there will also be an additional consent stage, which I think is right and proper.
But isn't it making, as the opposition suggests, Scottish MPs second-class MPs? The Shadow Scottish Secretary Ian Murray making the point that unelected members of the House of Lords might actually have more voting rights than elected MPs?
I don't think that's a fair criticism at all. If what we were proposing was to stop MPs from Scotland or Northern Ireland voting on any bill, then you might make that argument. But we're not taking away anyone's right. All bills will still have to be approved by the House of Commons as a whole, and any MP from any part of the United Kingdom can take part in that. What we're saying is that if it applies only to England, then there's an English consent motion that needs to be applied as well. And that's just replicating the same principle that applied for devolution in Scotland. When we were having the debates in the 1980s and 90s about setting up the Scottish Parliament, the complaint was that Westminster was legislating for Scotland when Scottish MPs didn't support that measure. This just applies the same principle for England.
What about who's going to decide what is an English-only vote, an English-only issue?
Well, I mean, we already have territorial designation of bills. If you look at the back of any bill, it states whether the bill as a whole or parts of it apply to the whole UK or to England and Wales. The Speaker will have a role in determining which matters apply solely to England, but one of the changes we're looking at making is that he will have the ability to consult with other colleagues on his panel of chairmen to make that decision if he feels he needs additional advice. That's one of the technical changes that we've reflected on over the summer. But it's not a radical departure from what we already have.
Let's use one example. It would be the bill concerning the building potentially of a third runway at Heathrow. Now that might be seen as an English-only issue, but actually it might have ramifications elsewhere as well.
And that's why Scottish MPs will still be able to vote on it and take part in the debates and table amendments to it. That doesn't change. We're not taking away anyone's right to debate on it. But if it applies only to England, then there'll be an English consent. Let me put it round the other way. If there was a proposed expansion of an airport in Scotland, and for some reason Scottish MPs opposed it, there would be an absolute outrage if that measure was applied to Scotland when there was not support for it. This just applies the same thing to England.
The Procedure Committee has suggested that the proposals might be piloted on selected legislation before being fully adopted. Is that something the government might consider?
Well, I think my understanding is that what will be announced before the debate on Thursday is that the new procedures will be reviewed after 1 year so that any difficulties can be ironed out.
26 bills in the Queen's speech. How many of these would you say, for example, would fall under the English-only legislation?
I don't have that figure, but we've had some debates already and bills which do apply only to England. A few weeks ago, for example, we had the bill which proposed to legalise assisted suicide. in England and Wales. Now that's a devolved matter. The Scottish Parliament debated and voted on it separately, and the measure was rejected. But say there had been a Commons majority as a whole for it, but English MPs opposed it, I think it's right that for that sort of bill, then there would have to be an English consent before it proceeded.
Ian Stewart, thanks for joining us on Scotland Tonight.
Thank you.
Well, for a response to the Conservative government's proposals, we spoke with the SNP's Shadow Commons leader, Pete Wishart. Pete Wishart, do you accept that under this plan, nothing will become law without Scottish MPs voting on it?
Well, I think we do get a vote, as the whole House will continue to get a vote on all these pieces of legislation. But the key innovation in these plans, these English votes for English laws plans, is that there will be an English veto. And English members of Parliament will effectively have the final say on what will not be passed in the House of Commons. Now, nothing like this has been done before. This is the first time ever that we're introducing a system where there will be a second-class status given to Scottish members of Parliament. And this is huge constitutionally. The Leader of the House continually talks about this just being a little tinkering, a modest little amendment and improvement. It is not. This is of huge constitutional significance. And what we're doing is almost breaking the rule book when it comes to how we're going to be assessing legislation as we go forward in the unitary UK Parliament.
Nonetheless, when it comes, no legislation in the UK would pass at all without Scottish MPs voting on it. OK, there may be certain things might not get to the voting stage, but if anything gets to the voting stage, Scottish MPs will vote on it. No,
well, that's not exactly true. We will get a vote, yes, but what English members will get is 2 votes, because what they'll do is they'll vote as members of Parliament at the unitary UK Parliament, and then they'll get a separate vote as English-only members before any legislation is passed. So what they effectively have is a veto on this type of legislation. Now, this is legislation that might have financial impacts on Scotland, that might have consequences which aren't immediately apparent on the face of the bill. And we have to look at these things. I mean, I'm elected to represent the people of Perth and North Perthshire, and if anything's going to be passing through the UK Parliament which might have an impact on health services or education facilities in my constituency, it's absolutely right that I look after that interest.
And would you not be satisfied that the Speaker would be able to make a judgment on whether it would impact on your constituents or not?
Well, I'm actually more concerned about what I've seen from the Procedure Committee and what's been accepted to the changes in Standing Order about the role of the Speaker. I mean, this is an invidious position to put our neutral Speaker into, where he will be making a political decision as to whether I and my Scottish colleagues will be able to participate in certain sections of legislation and whether we'll be able to vote in it. Now, the new Standing Orders are suggesting that the Speaker consults 2 random members of the Speaker's panel for their advice and their input. Who he should be consulting, of course, is the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, Scottish Ministers, the Welsh Assembly. I mean, this is an important decision which could lock us out and exclude us from vital decision-making which will impact on my constituents.
Isn't there, though, an inherent unfairness about the fact that English MPs can't vote and devolve Scottish issues, but Scottish MPs can vote on English issues?
I've got no issue about all of this, and we traditionally do not vote on issues which are English only, and we've done that since devolution has been in place. But what is happening this time is that this is being imposed on us with a set of rules which we think are arbitrary and unfair. It's putting the Speaker into a ridiculous situation where he's having to assess what is and what isn't English-only legislation. For the first time ever constitutionally, there will be 2 classes of members of Parliament in the unitary UK Parliament, and anybody who's looked at this, whether it's top constitutionalists to the man on the street, have seen that what's happening is that what we're doing is creating something new and different in the House of Commons. Now, I say to the Leader of the House, and I'll say this on Thursday in this debate, that follow the advice of the Procedure Committee. Take this away and have a look at it again. If you're going to do this, perhaps pilot it, but just to introduce it the way that he plans, I don't think is going to be suitable, and certainly will not secure the support of Scottish members of Parliament.
If you accept that as an issue, though, what would your suggestion be?
Well, I think it's actually
worked, of course.
I think it's actually worked quite well up to this stage. You know, I mean, what we do as the Scottish National Party group at Westminster, what we traditionally do is we get the business for next week, we scour it for the Scottish interest. If there is a Scottish interest in that legislation, we'll take an interest in it. If there's none, we leave it alone. And that's how we've always done this. But what this Conservative government want to do is to impose a set of rules, binding rules, which will lock us out. And even if we were to protest and say, hold on a minute, there's something wrong about how you've got this certification going on, there's no opportunity for us to address this. The Speaker doesn't have to give a decision about why we're not going to be included in this legislation, and he doesn't have to explain himself to anybody. So we'll be locked out with any sort of opportunity to address this.
Pete Wishart, thanks for joining us in Scotland Tonight. We're now joined from London by the political correspondent Kuzak. James, will this go through?
There's a large number of traditionalists on the Conservative benches. That means people who really value the procedure and the traditions of the House of Commons. And there's, this is Tories I'm talking about, described this new plan to me today as a dog's breakfast, or trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Now, they don't particularly want to see these changes happening if it means the sanctity, if you like, of the House of Commons is going to be changed. Now, there's a research paper actually put into the House of Commons library recently which showed that, I think it was in the last couple of decades, there's only been 2 occasions, and I mean 2 occasions, when actually the difference of Scottish MPs has changed the outcome of a vote. So a lot of these people don't particularly want this, think that that the House of Commons is taking steps towards a federalist system, and that's not good for anybody, because a federalist system means England with 90%, if you like, of the time and the show. And if they want an English Parliament, this is not the way to go about it. So whilst the rebellion might be traditionally strong, maybe the numbers are not there, so I think, John, probably this would go through.
And what about the point that Pete Wishart was making about the position the Speaker will be put in deciding what is and is not English-only legislation?
That's one of the key points. It's effectively the politicisation of the Speaker. Now, I'm not going to get technical and go back into history, but the Bill of Rights in 1689, that was not 1999, 1689, basically allowed Parliament to basically not go anywhere near the courts. Namely, the courts don't usually intervene. Now, there's a sort of assumption that what we're looking at, that nobody will interfere, nobody will go to the courts, nobody will seek judicial review. That is probably not going to be the case. These decisions by the Speaker will be highly controversial, whatever he decides, and they will be open to, I think, the courts. And there's a large part of Parliament that does not want to see that happen.
How difficult will it be to define English legislation, whether the Speaker does it or however it works?
It might not be that difficult to define it, because I think, as Pete Wishart said, there are rules already there. But it's not so much you can ring fence anything and say this only applies to Scotland. But the United Kingdom is very much an interlinked economy. That's the whole point, I think, of those people who regard any form of breakup of the United Kingdom that would actually, it would impact on the individual structures. So to say that this is just one thing that will affect Scotland only, well, what are those things? For instance, if we're going to have 3 bills looked at, or three areas over the next year, for instance, will one of them be the finance bill, and we can break that down into constituent parts? Because that's not possible. The whole of the UK is interlinked, and it will be difficult for the Speaker to at least maintain this. Now, the idea is, if the Speaker makes a decision, nobody can challenge it, and he doesn't have to publish what the reasoning are. Now, Parliament don't like that. They want transparency, and this particular plan doesn't have that.
James Kuzak, thanks for joining us on Scotland Tonight.